Have you ever fed your shrimp and still wondered if you're doing it right? They're active, they're grazing, the tank looks fine. But you don't know if they're properly fed or if you're unintentionally overfeeding and creating problems you won't see until later. Here's the truth. Shrimp feeding isn't just about how much food you add. It's about access. Access to natural food like biofilm and algae, and access to the right supplemental food in the right form and place. In this video, I'll break down how shrimp actually feed, where their food comes from, the most common feeding mistakes, and how to fix them before they turn into losses. Let's dive right in. Most shrimp are natural grazers. When you look into your aquarium, you'll notice them constantly picking at surfaces like the glass, plants, hardscape, substrate, even filter media. It can look like they never stop eating, but that's not because they're hungry. It's because grazing is how shrimp are built to survive. Shrimp are detritivores and scavengers. In the wild and in aquariums, they spend most of their time foraging for tiny, microscopic food sources rather than eating large meals. This near-constant grazing is their default behavior and a core part of their health. The reason for this comes down to their digestive system. Shrimp have a simple, fast-moving gut with no large stomach for food storage. Nutrients move through them quickly, so they rely on a steady intake of very small food particles throughout the day rather than occasional large feedings. This is why shrimp will continue grazing even after you feed them. Once added food is gone, they go straight back to picking at surfaces. That behavior doesn't mean they're underfed. It means their environment is supporting their natural feeding rhythm. Filter feeding shrimp, like bamboo shrimp and vampire shrimp, feed differently. They don't graze surfaces the same way other shrimp do. Instead, they position themselves in areas with strong water flow and use fan-like appendages to collect microscopic food particles drifting through the water column. Rather than searching for food, filter feeders rely on current to deliver it. This makes water movement and particle size far more important for them than food placed on the substrate. Understanding whether a shrimp is a grazer or a filter feeder sets the foundation for everything that comes next. Biofilm is one of the most important and most misunderstood food sources in an aquarium. If you've ever touched the inside of your aquarium glass or hardscape and felt a slimy texture, that's biofilm. It may not look or feel appealing, but it's a critical part of a healthy, stable shrimp ecosystem. Biofilm is a natural food source made up of bacteria, algae, fungi, and other microscopic organisms. These microorganisms produce a clear, sticky matrix that allows them to attach to surfaces like glass, driftwood, rocks, plants, substrate, and filter media. That slimy layer isn't waste. It's food. Most biofilm in an aquarium is invisible. At healthy, stable levels, you often won't see it at all. What you can see are cloudy patches, white fuzz on new wood, or slimy buildup, which is usually just a small portion of a much larger microbial community working throughout the tank. The absence of visible biofilm doesn't mean it isn't there. In mature tanks, the best biofilm is often the least noticeable. Biofilm begins forming very early in a new tank. As soon as water, surfaces, and nutrients are present, bacteria attach and start producing that sticky matrix. Over time, more microorganisms join in, forming a complex, multi-species community. As organic material builds up from plant matter, waste, and natural sugars released by wood and leaves, biofilm continues to grow. In most tanks, useful biofilm takes about 4 to 8 weeks to develop. A healthy supply of biofilm is a positive sign, but visible biofilm alone does not mean a tank is fully cycled. Cycling is all about bacterial capacity, not appearance. Water parameters should always be tested before adding shrimp. Adding shrimp before biofilm has had time to establish can lead to slow starvation and force heavy supplemental feeding, increasing the risk of ammonia and nitrite spikes. For grazing shrimp like Neocaridina and Amano, biofilm is a daily food source. They actively scrape it from surfaces throughout the tank. Steady, continuous grazing is one of the clearest signs that the tank is producing enough natural food. Filter feeding shrimp interact with biofilm differently. As biofilm matures, tiny fragments break loose and enter the water column. Along with microscopic algae and detritus, these particles are carried by the current and captured by bamboo and vampire shrimp. Because of this, mature tanks with lots of established surfaces support filter feeders far better than new or overly clean setups. Biofilm does not require light, only nutrients. When it builds up, it can appear translucent or cloudy, especially on new driftwood. That white or brown fuzz on fresh wood is biofilm feeding on natural sugars, not fungus or disease, and it usually fades as the tank matures. Because biofilm feeds on nutrients, how you manage food directly affects it. One way to encourage biofilm in new tanks is ghost feeding with powdered foods. That simply means feeding the tank without inhabitants, so microscopic particles can spread throughout the system and break down. As those particles decompose, microorganisms multiply and biofilm develops. Feeding more food can also increase biofilm, but balance is critical. Excess food breaking down in the tank can raise ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate levels, which are toxic to shrimp even at low concentrations. If you experiment with heavier feeding, monitoring water parameters is essential. Snails can help manage excess food by breaking it down more quickly before it becomes a problem. Leaf litter and botanicals are another effective way to promote biofilm. Indian almond leaves, mulberry leaves, oak leaves, alder cones, and similar materials provide massive surface area for microbial growth. As they slowly decompose, they release nutrients that support biofilm development. They may darken the water or slightly lower pH, but tannins are generally beneficial for shrimp and easy to manage with water changes. Adding more plants and hardscape also supports biofilm growth. Driftwood, lava rock, cholla wood, mosses, and textured stones all increase surface area for microorganisms to colonize. More surfaces mean more biofilm and more natural food for shrimp. One of the simplest and most overlooked ways to support biofilm is to stop overcleaning. Frequent glass scraping and aggressive substrate vacuuming remove both biofilm and the nutrients that sustain it. Cleaning the front glass for viewing is fine, but leaving the sides, back, hardscape, and substrate undisturbed allows biofilm to develop where shrimp actually feed. While biofilm is beneficial, it does consume oxygen. Overusing bacteria-promoting powdered foods can reduce oxygen levels and stress or even suffocate shrimp, especially in low-flow tanks. Good aeration and surface movement are essential. Air stones help improve gas exchange and stabilize oxygen levels. If biofilm becomes excessive, it can be reduced by scraping glass, lightly vacuuming the substrate, reducing powdered foods, or removing excess botanicals. The goal isn't to eliminate biofilm, it's to keep it in balance. What matters most is this: biofilm is free food that grows on its own, stabilizes the ecosystem, and feeds shrimp the way nature intended. If biofilm is the invisible foundation of shrimp feeding, algae is the part you can actually see, and it plays a much bigger role than most people realize. Algae is a natural part of every aquarium. It's a group of simple, photosynthetic organisms that use light and dissolve nutrients to grow. In aquariums, those nutrients usually come from fish waste, uneaten food, decaying plant matter, and fertilizers. When light and nutrients are present, algae will grow, and that's not a failure, it's part of a functioning ecosystem. While algae often gets labeled as a problem, it actually plays several important roles. It absorbs excess nutrients, produces oxygen, supports microorganisms, and provides a natural food source for shrimp and other invertebrates. Completely eliminating algae isn't realistic or desirable. The goal is balance, not a spotless tank. Not all algae is the same, and not all shrimp interact with it in the same way. Grazing shrimp spend most of their day picking at surfaces like the glass, plants, rocks, and wood. As they graze, they consume soft algae, biofilm, and organic detritus. This constant grazing keeps algae thin and prevents it from overtaking the aquascape. Neocaridina shrimp, such as red cherry shrimp and their colomorphs, focus mainly on softer algae. They will nibble on brown algae and some hair algae, but they tend to avoid tougher types like blackbeard algae, staghorn algae, and cyanobacteria, especially when other food sources are available. Amano shrimp are among the most versatile algae eaters commonly kept in aquariums. They readily consume soft green algae, hair and thread algae, brown algae, and may even slowly graze blackbeard algae when kept in larger groups. Even so, they don't eat every type of algae, and usually ignore blue-green algae and staghorn algae. Other grazing shrimp such as babalti, shortnose, purple zebra, and similar species follow a similar pattern. They focus on soft algae and avoid harder, more stubborn algae that require aggressive grazing. No shrimp species eats every type of algae. Filter-feeding shrimp like bamboo shrimp and vampire shrimp interact with algae very differently. They do not scrape algae from surfaces. Instead, they rely on microscopic particles suspended in the water column. While they may capture tiny algae cells drifting in the current, they do not contribute meaningfully to surface algae control and should never be relied on as algae eaters. It's also important to understand that algae is not a complete diet. While it provides grazing material and fiber, it lacks sufficient protein, minerals, and specific nutrients for long-term health. Shrimp still require supplemental feeding to support growth, molting, and reproduction. Algae works best as part of a broader feeding system, not as the sole food source. In shrimp tanks, a light coating of green algae on the glass can actually be beneficial. Many shrimp keepers intentionally allow algae to grow on the side and back panels to create constant grazing surfaces. This is especially helpful for baby shrimp, which rely heavily on soft algae and biofilm during their early growth stages. If algae builds up on the front glass and starts blocking your view, it's perfectly fine to scrape just that panel. Leaving the other panels untouched allows shrimp to graze naturally throughout the day without relying entirely on added food. A clean viewing pane and algae-covered grazing panels strike a healthy balance between visibility and nutrition. Managing algae still comes down to balance. Shrimp help control soft algae, but they're not a cure-all. Light intensity, lighting duration, nutrient input, plant growth, and maintenance all play a role. A light, steady presence of algae is healthy and beneficial. Heavy blooms usually signal an imbalance that needs correction. The important thing to understand is this: algae isn't just something to fight, it's a natural food source shrimp are designed to use. When kept in balance and paired with proper feeding, algae supports natural grazing behavior, reduces stress, and contributes to a stable, food-rich shrimp tank. Biofilm and algae form the natural base of shrimp feeding, but there's another layer that doesn't just grow on surfaces, it creates new ones. And that's where botanicals come in. In the wild, shrimp don't live on clean sand and bare glass. They live in streams and waterways filled with fallen leaves, seed pods, twigs, and decaying plant matter. These natural materials are known as botanicals, and they form the foundation of both the shrimp's environment and their food web. In aquariums, botanicals include dried leaves, seed pods, bark, and natural woods that slowly break down underwater. While they're often associated with blackwater or natural-style tanks, their value goes far beyond aesthetics. Botanicals influence water chemistry, add structure, and most importantly, create a continuous natural food source for shrimp. As botanicals break down, they release tannins and organic compounds that slowly soften the water and lower pH, mimicking conditions many shrimp species evolved in. For some species, especially Caridina shrimp, this environment isn't just beneficial, it's essential. The real feeding value of botanicals comes from what grows on them. As leaves, pods, and wood decompose, their surfaces become covered in biofilm, fungi, and microorganisms. This slimy layer is exactly what shrimp are designed to eat. Botanicals quickly turn into long-term grazing platforms where shrimp can harvest tiny food particles throughout the day. This is especially important for baby shrimp. Shrimplets often stay in one area and rely heavily on biofilm and microfauna for nutrition. Leaf litter and seed pods provide both food and shelter during these vulnerable stages, improving survival and reducing stress. Some botanicals are also eaten directly once they soften. Indian almond leaves, mulberry leaves, and guava leaves gradually break down and become palatable to shrimp and snails. Shrimp may graze on them for weeks, sometimes consuming them completely. Cholla wood softens slowly over time, allowing shrimp to feed on both the surface and interior structure. Seed pods and cones add another layer of benefit. Smaller pods break down quickly and become dense feeding zones, while larger pods and cones last longer and provide stable grazing surfaces, shelter, and habitat for microfauna. Many shrimp keepers notice shrimp gathering on botanicals almost immediately after they're added. Botanicals also enrich the tank physically. Leaf litter creates hiding places for shrimp after molting, while pods, bark, and wood create shaded areas and break up lines of sight. This added structure reduces stress and encourages natural behavior. When using botanicals, preparation matters, but it doesn't need to be complicated. Always source botanicals intended for aquarium use, or collect only naturally dried materials from pesticide-free areas. Most botanicals should be boiled or soaked before adding them to remove contaminants and help them sink. Introduce them gradually rather than all at once, especially in smaller tanks since they release tannins and organic compounds as they break down. There's no need to remove botanicals quickly. Allowing them to fully decompose supports biofilm, microfauna, and long-term grazing. Different botanicals break down at different speeds. Soft leaves disappear faster and may need replacement, while harder leaves, pods, and cones last longer and provide more stable feeding surfaces. Leaving botanicals in place until they fully break down helps maintain a steady background food supply inside the tank. This is where botanicals really matter. They're not only decorations, they're slow-release food systems. By adding leaves, pods, and natural materials, you're creating new surfaces, growing biofilm, feeding microfauna, and giving shrimp access to food the way nature intended. Botanicals don't replace feeding, but they dramatically reduce pressure on it. When used properly, they help create a stable, low-stress, food-rich environment where shrimp can thrive. At this point, your aquarium is already producing food on its own, so when you add food, it should be intentional, targeted, and supportive. That's where vegetables and duckweed come in. Vegetables are one of the most common supplemental foods used in shrimp tanks. When prepared and fed correctly, they add fiber, minerals, and plant-based nutrients that support digestion, coloration, growth, and molting. When used incorrectly, they can quickly foul the water and cause more harm than good. Vegetables should be treated as a supplement, not a staple. In a mature tank, they aren't required, they're optional enrichment. They work best when they support natural grazing rather than replace it. In a healthy tank, shrimp already spend most of their time feeding on biofilm and algae, so vegetables mainly help fill nutritional gaps during growth, breeding, or periods of limited natural food. Blanching vegetables is essential. Raw vegetables are too firm, often float, and may carry surface contaminants. Blanching softens plant fibers so shrimp can rasp them easily, helps the pieces sink, and kills surface bacteria, parasites, and other contaminants that could otherwise be introduced into the tank. It also turns vegetables into temporary grazing platforms that quickly grow biofilm. When a blanched vegetable is added to the tank, shrimp don't just eat the plant tissue. Within hours, bacteria, fungi, and microscopic algae colonize the surface. Shrimp spend much of their time grazing on that biofilm, just as they do on Botanicals and Hardscape. In this way, vegetables function less like a single meal and more like a short-term grazing station. Vegetables should always be prepared carefully. Use organic produce whenever possible. Wash thoroughly and peel vegetables like cucumber and zucchini, since pesticides can penetrate the skin and may not be removed by rinsing alone. Slice vegetables thinly, boil them for 1 to 3 minutes, then cool them quickly in cold water. Avoid overcooking, which causes nutrients to leach out and turns food mushy. Vegetables should be fed once or twice per week and removed once they begin breaking down, usually within a few hours and no longer than 24 hours, especially in tanks with small colonies. Feeding dishes, skewers, or clips help keep food contained and make removal easy. Some of the best vegetables to feed shrimp include zucchini and cucumber, which are both easy to eat once blanched. Zucchini offers more nutritional value, providing fiber, small amounts of protein, and vitamins that support digestion and overall health. Cucumber is mostly water, but it still provides fiber and acts as a gentle, low-impact grazing food that encourages feeding behavior. Because it breaks down quickly and offers fewer nutrients, it should be removed sooner and not relied on as a primary vegetable. Spinach and kale provide fiber, protein, and calcium that support digestion and exoskeleton development. Carrots and sweet potato are rich in carotenoids that enhance coloration, especially reds and oranges. Broccoli florets and peas offer higher protein, but should be fed in small amounts to avoid fouling the water. Lettuce can be used occasionally, but darker leafy greens provide better overall nutrition. Duckweed fits into this category but behaves differently than blanched vegetables. Duckweed is a floating plant that many aquarists love or hate because of how quickly it spreads. In nutrient-rich, slow-moving water, it can form dense surface mats. As a plant, duckweed absorbs nitrates and phosphates, helping control excess nutrients and competing with algae. It also provides shade and shelter, especially for baby shrimp. Duckweed can also be used as food. Nutritionally, it's surprisingly rich, containing carbohydrates, minerals, a high protein content, and omega-3 fatty acids. When prepared properly, shrimp will readily graze on it, and filter-feeding shrimp can benefit from the fine particles it releases. To prepare duckweed for feeding, it should be briefly blanched just like vegetables. Scoop a small amount from a clean source, boil it for about 2 minutes, then cool it quickly in cold water. Once blanched, duckweed sinks and becomes accessible to grazing shrimp. It can be fed whole, chopped, or crushed into finer particles for baby shrimp and filter feeders. Because it breaks down quickly, it should be fed sparingly and removed if uneaten. Fruits, by contrast, are generally not recommended. Fruits contain far more sugar than vegetables, and in a closed aquarium system, that sugar breaks down rapidly. This can fuel bacterial blooms, reduce oxygen levels, and cause ammonia spikes. While shrimp may sample fruit if offered, the risks outweigh the benefits. For this reason, it's best to avoid fruits altogether and stick with vegetables and duckweed for slow, controlled breakdown. What matters here is moderation. Vegetables and duckweed are supplemental tools. When prepared correctly and fed sparingly, they add nutritional diversity, enrichment, and additional grazing opportunities. When overused, they quickly become a water quality issue. Natural food, botanicals, vegetables, and duckweed all support grazing. But sometimes the tank needs targeted nutrition. That's where commercial foods come in. Commercial foods are designed to supplement what shrimp already graze on in the aquarium, not replace it. Shrimp are detritivores and scavengers by nature. They spend their lives feeding on biofilm, algae, decaying plant matter, leftover food, and microscopic particles suspended in the water column. While this natural grazing forms the foundation of their diet, relying on it alone can leave nutritional gaps, especially in growing colonies, breeding tanks, heavily stocked setups, or newer aquariums. A varied diet supports proper growth, coloration, successful molts, and reproduction, and commercial foods give you a way to support those needs intentionally. Commercial shrimp foods come in several different forms, and each behaves differently once it enters the aquarium. Understanding how these foods move, dissolve, and settle is just as important as understanding when to use them. Powdered foods are one of the most versatile options available to shrimp keepers. These ultrafine particles disperse through the water column, settling across glass, plants, hardscape, substrate, and filter media. This closely mimics how shrimp naturally encounter food in the wild. Powdered foods are especially useful for baby shrimp that don't roam far, filter feeding shrimp like bamboo and vampire shrimp that rely on suspended particles, and newer tanks where biofilm is still developing. Some powdered foods also help stimulate biofilm growth, supporting the food web rather than simply feeding shrimp directly. Well-known powdered options include products from Glass Garden such as Bacteria-E, Shrimp Baby, and Shrimp Fit. Bacteria-E is commonly used to support biofilm development by introducing microorganisms and nutrients that help establish natural grazing surfaces throughout the tank. Shrimp Baby is designed to deliver ultrafine particles to shrimplets that rarely travel far from their shelters, improving early survival and growth. Shrimp Fit is typically used as a supplemental powdered food to support overall vitality, immune response, and recovery during periods of stress, molting, or breeding. These foods are extremely concentrated and only very small amounts are needed. Because powdered foods spread so efficiently, they are powerful tools when used carefully, but they require restraint and consistency to avoid problems, which I'll cover later when I talk about common feeding mistakes. Flake foods are often overlooked in shrimp tanks, but they can be very effective when used properly. Most fish flakes can be crushed into a fine powder, essentially turning them into a shrimp-safe food that behaves similarly to commercial powdered foods. Once crushed, flake particles settle across surfaces and provide grazing opportunities for shrimp of all sizes. From time to time, I personally like using New Life Spectrum flakes. When crushed finely, they spread well, support natural grazing behavior, and work especially nicely in mixed community tanks where shrimp and fish share the same space. Used occasionally, flake foods offer flexibility without disrupting the feeding balance. Pellet foods are one of the most commonly used shrimp foods and are especially useful for targeted feeding. Pellets sink quickly and remain localized, which makes it easier to observe feeding behavior and remove leftovers before they affect water quality. Many pellets soften over time, allowing shrimp to graze slowly rather than rushing to consume them all at once. From time to time, I personally use New Life Spectrum Algae Max pellets as well as Serra Vipa Chips Nature. Both soften well in the aquarium and allow shrimp to graze naturally rather than pile on food aggressively. Used occasionally, pellet foods like these work well for controlled feeding and make it easier to monitor how much is actually being eaten. There are also many well-known shrimp-specific pellet options available. Products like Glass Garden Shrimp Dinner and Mineral Junkie are ones I also use on a regular basis. Shrimp Dinner functions as a balanced staple food that supports growth, coloration, and overall vitality, while Mineral Junkie is designed to provide additional minerals that support proper shell formation and successful molts. Because of this, pellets may be used either as regular staples or as occasional mineral supplements, depending on the needs of the tank. In tanks with shrimp of all ages, pellets can be crushed or broken apart so smaller shrimp aren't outcompeted by adults. Frozen foods are another useful supplemental option, particularly in breeding setups with higher protein demands. Foods like frozen brine shrimp, baby brine shrimp, bloodworms, Daphnia, and spirulina-based blends provide easily digestible animal protein that supports egg development and recovery after molting. Well-known frozen options from Hikari are commonly used for this purpose and are formulated to be clean, consistent, and safe for aquarium use. These foods should be offered sparingly and in small amounts, as uneaten portions break down quickly, but when used occasionally, they add valuable dietary variety without overwhelming the tank. Gel foods are less common, but they offer excellent control over how food behaves in the aquarium. These foods are prepared by mixing powder with hot water, allowing it to set into a soft gel that sinks quickly and breaks down slowly. A well-known example is gel foods from Repashy. Gel foods stay contained, reduce drifting, and allow shrimp to graze at their own pace. They're especially useful in breeder tanks, display tanks, or setups where you want feeding confined to a specific area. Because gel foods hold their shape, it's easier to judge how much is being eaten and remove excess before it impacts water quality. For short absences, such as weekend trips or brief vacations, long-lasting food blocks can provide temporary support in established shrimp tanks. Products like ZooMed Nano Banquet blocks dissolve slowly over several days, releasing small amounts of food into the system. These are best used only when you'll be away and unable to feed normally, not as a routine feeding solution. In mature tanks with stable biofilm and algae growth, shrimp can often graze successfully for several days without added food, so food blocks should be seen as a backup rather than a necessity. The takeaway here is balance. Commercial foods are tools, not replacements for natural grazing. Powdered foods support babies, biofilm, and filter feeders. Flakes offer flexibility. Pellets allow controlled targeted feeding. Frozen foods add occasional protein for growth and breeding. Gel foods provide structure and precision. The goal isn't to feed more food, it's to feed in a way that works with the ecosystem you've already built. Did you know keeping Amano shrimp alongside filter feeding shrimp like bamboo or vampire shrimp can offer an unexpected benefit? When Amano shrimp reproduce, their larvae are released into the water column but cannot survive in fresh water. As these tiny larvae drift through the tank, they become a natural, nutrient-rich food source for filter feeders, adding another layer to the aquarium's food web and reinforcing how interconnected feeding truly is. Now that you understand how powdered and pellet foods actually function in a shrimp tank, this is where it all comes together. I've taken those same principles and applied them to my own shrimp foods, designed to give shrimp the same variety they naturally seek out in the wild. When nutrition is right, shrimp stay active, colorful, resilient, and far more likely to reproduce. Let's start with the staples, foods you can feed once or even multiple times each week. Fuse is a carefully balanced fusion of land and sea ingredients. It combines proteins like salmon, krill, and shrimp with algae, yeast, and essential vitamins. This mix provides omega-3s for color, antioxidants for immune support, and gut-friendly nutrients that support digestion and steady growth. Fuse also includes a small scoop so feeding stays consistent and controlled. To complement that, there's Vita. While Fuse leans toward protein, Vita is entirely plant-based. It's made from carrot, spinach, kale, beetroot, pumpkin, and sweet potato, ingredients naturally rich in fiber, minerals, and antioxidants that support healthy molts, natural coloration, and long-term vitality. Like Fuse, it comes with its own scoop, making portion control simple. Now for the complementary foods, ideal as weekly additions or occasional treats. Snow is my snowflake-style food made from soybean hull pellets. When it hits the water, it expands into a soft layer that shrimp can graze on for days. As it slowly breaks down, it fuels biofilm growth, one of the most important natural food sources for shrimp. Snow is high in fiber, safe to leave in the tank long-term, and works well as a vacation food. And finally, there's Buzz, pure natural bee pollen granules. Buzz is packed with protein, amino acids, vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. Even a small weekly feeding can noticeably support growth, color, energy, and overall health. When feeding is simple and consistent, your entire tank becomes easier to manage and your shrimp can thrive. If you want to try them yourself, you can pick up any of these foods individually, grab the signature 4-pack, or start with the sample pack. You'll get 10% off with promo code FOREVER10. Skittle Squad members on Patreon also unlock exclusive member pricing, along with behind-the-scenes access and deeper insight into everything happening in my aquariums. You'll find links in the description and pinned comment below. One of the most common questions new shrimp keepers ask is, how often should I feed my shrimp? And the honest answer is, usually less often than you think. Shrimp are not meal-based eaters. They're constant grazers. In a healthy established aquarium, shrimp spend most of their day feeding on biofilm, algae, detritus, and microscopic organisms growing on surfaces. Supplemental food is meant to support that grazing, not replace it. Because of this, shrimp do not need to be fed every day to stay healthy. In fact, feeding too frequently is far more dangerous than feeding too little. It's almost always better to slightly underfeed than to overfeed. Shrimp have fast, simple digestive systems, and excess food quickly turns into waste. Uneaten food breaks down into ammonia and nitrite, which are both extremely toxic to shrimp, even at very low levels. Many feeding-related shrimp losses are actually water quality issues in disguise. In mature tanks with visible grazing activity, most shrimp colonies do very well with feeding 2 to 4 times per week, depending on colony size, tank age, and how much natural food is available. Personally, I feed my aquariums every other day and rotate through different foods to provide variety without excess. Breeding setups or tanks with very large colonies may require slightly more frequent feeding, but still in very small amounts. Fasting is not only safe for shrimp, it's healthy. Skipping a day or two of feeding allows shrimp to rely more heavily on natural food sources, reduces waste buildup, and helps stabilize water parameters. During fasting periods, shrimp don't stop eating. They simply return to grazing more heavily on biofilm and algae. This closely mirrors how shrimp feed in the wild. Molting is where nutrition really matters, and minerals are the part most people overlook. Shrimp need a steady supply of minerals, especially calcium, to rebuild a strong exoskeleton after every molt. Food contributes to this, but it's not the only source. One of the simplest ways to support mineral balance is to leave molts in the tank. For grazing shrimp and snails, a shed shell isn't waste. It's a recyclable mineral source that will often be picked and reused over time. Filter feeding shrimp like bamboo and vampire shrimp are an exception here. They generally do not consume their own molts. However, if they share the tank with other shrimp species or snails, those tank mates will often consume the molt instead. You can also provide passive mineral sources that dissolve slowly in the background, such as cuttlebone, mineral stones, or shrimp mineral blocks. These aren't feeding events, they're long-term support systems. The goal isn't to add more minerals, but to keep them consistently available. When mineral levels are stable, molts are smoother, shrimp stay more active, and breeding tends to be more reliable. Another important factor is tank maturity. Newly set up aquariums produce very little natural food, which means shrimp rely more heavily on supplemental feeding. As the tank matures, biofilm and algae increase, and feeding frequency should decrease accordingly. Many keepers never adjust their feeding habits as tanks age, which leads to slow nutrient buildup over time. It's also worth noting that shrimp can comfortably go several days without added food in established systems. This is why heavy pre-feeding before short vacations is often unnecessary and can do more harm than good. In most cases, a healthier shrimp tank is better left alone than over-prepared. What matters most here is observation. Healthy shrimp should be active, grazing throughout the tank, and responsive to food when it's offered, but not frantic. Feeding frequency isn't about following a strict schedule, it's about responding to what the tank is already providing. When you let the aquarium ecosystem do most of the work and use food as support rather than a crutch, shrimp thrive with less effort and fewer problems. Even when food type and feeding frequency are right, problems can still show up, usually because of how feeding is handled. That's where the most common feeding mistakes come in. Most feeding problems in shrimp tanks don't come from bad intentions. They come from feeding without fully understanding how shrimp actually eat. Shrimp are opportunistic grazers that thrive on balance, stability, and natural food sources. When feeding goes wrong, it rarely shows up right away. Instead, it tends to appear later as stress, failed molts, or water quality issues rather than obvious hunger. Overfeeding and leaving excess food in the tank is one of the fastest ways to destabilize an aquarium. Shrimp need very little supplemental food, especially in mature tanks where biofilm and algae are already present. Excess food breaks down quickly, fueling bacterial blooms and releasing ammonia and nitrite, which are both extremely toxic to shrimp. Cloudy water, surface films, foul smells, or shrimp losing interest in food are often early warning signs. Feeding smaller portions, feeding less often, and removing uneaten food promptly is far safer than trying to feed through the problem. Feeding shrimp too often overwhelms the natural balance of the aquarium. Shrimp are not meal-based animals, they're built to graze continuously. Feeding every day, particularly in established tanks, can exceed the biological capacity of the system. Skipping feeding days allows shrimp to return to natural grazing and gives the tank time to process nutrients. Fasting isn't harmful to shrimp. In many cases, it's beneficial. Feeding too much protein for extended periods quietly creates long-term problems. Shrimp do need protein for growth and reproduction, but they're not designed for constant high-protein diets. In nature, protein appears intermittently from microorganisms, tiny invertebrates, and decaying organic matter, not daily concentrated meals. Excess protein over time can contribute to failed molts, shortened lifespans, rapid growth, and increased waste production. Variety matters more than pushing protein levels. Using the wrong type of food for the tank or species limits access to nutrition. Powdered foods are ideal for baby shrimp and filter feeders, but can cause issues when overused in low-flow tanks. Large pellets may be convenient, but they can exclude juveniles or filter feeding shrimp entirely. Food choice should match how food moves through the aquarium and how shrimp physically access it, not just what's easiest to add. Overusing bacteria-promoting powders like Bacteria E can reduce oxygen levels in the tank. These products are designed to encourage biofilm growth, not to function as traditional food. When overdosed, bacterial populations can expand faster than the system can support, consuming oxygen in the process. This may lead to cloudy water, surface scum, sluggish shrimp, or even suffocation. Very small amounts used infrequently, combined with good aeration, are far more effective. Overcleaning grazing surfaces removes the very food shrimp rely on between feedings. Scrubbing algae from glass, aggressively vacuuming the substrate, or overcleaning sponge filters strips away biofilm and detritus. Shrimp don't just eat what you add, they depend on what grows naturally in the tank. Cleaning the front glass for viewing is fine, but leaving the sides, back, hardscape, and filters untouched preserves essential grazing areas. Cleaning sponge filters too aggressively can suddenly reduce available food. Sponge filters are not just filtration, they're constant feeding zones. Cleaning all sponges at once can remove a large portion of biofilm from the system. Rotating sponge cleanings and spacing them away from feeding days helps maintain stability and reduces competition for food. Adding too many botanicals at once can overwhelm the aquarium. While botanicals are extremely beneficial for shrimp, introducing large quantities too quickly increases decomposing organic matter. This can lower oxygen levels, increase bacterial activity, and destabilize water parameters. Botanicals work best when added gradually, allowing the tank time to adjust. Reactive feeding often makes situations worse. When shrimp hide, slow down, or behave unusually, it's easy to assume hunger and add more food. In reality, these behaviors are usually linked to molting, water quality, or stress. Adding food during these periods increases waste and compounds the problem. Pausing feeding, checking parameters, and observing is usually the better response. Feeding filter feeding shrimp like grazers leads to slow starvation. Bamboo and vampire shrimp rely on fine particles suspended in the water column and strong flow. When they abandon high-flow perches and begin digging through the substrate, it's a sign the water column isn't carrying enough food. The solution isn't placing food on the bottom, it's delivering appropriately fine particles directly into the flow so they remain suspended long enough to be captured. Changing too many feeding variables at once makes problems difficult to diagnose. Switching foods, adjusting portions, increasing frequency, and adding botanicals all at the same time removes clarity. Shrimp respond best to gradual adjustments. Changing one variable at a time and observing for several days makes it far easier to understand what's actually helping or hurting. What all of these issues have in common is imbalance. Feeding shrimp isn't about adding more food, it's about supporting natural grazing without overwhelming the system. When feeding works with the aquarium instead of against it, shrimp stay healthier, water remains stable, and problems become much easier to prevent. When feeding is balanced, shrimp behavior becomes the clearest feedback you have. That's where feeding behavior cues come in. Once the basics are in place, the most reliable way to know whether your shrimp are being fed correctly isn't a schedule or portion size, it's their behavior. Shrimp constantly communicate their needs through how they move, where they gather, and how they respond to food. In a healthy, well-fed tank, shrimp appear calm and purposeful. They spread out across the aquarium, grazing on glass, plants, hardscape, and filter media rather than piling into one spot. Supplemental food may attract interest, but it doesn't trigger panic or competition. Some shrimp may ignore food entirely and continue grazing elsewhere, which is normal in mature tanks with strong natural food production. Filter feeding shrimp offer especially clear signals. When bamboo and vampire shrimp are receiving enough suspended food, they spend most of their time perched in areas of flow, holding their fans open and actively filtering. Consistent fanning in high-flow zones is a strong sign that particle size, circulation, and food delivery are working together. When these shrimp abandon their perches and begin roaming or digging, it's often a sign that the water column isn't carrying enough edible particles. Shrimp behavior also shifts naturally during molting and breeding. It's common for shrimp to reduce interest in supplemental food shortly before and after a molt, even in well-fed systems. Buried females may eat less prepared food while continuing to graze quietly. These pauses are normal and don't require intervention. Adding more food during these periods usually creates problems rather than solving them. As tanks mature, feeding responses change. Newer aquariums often produce stronger, more immediate reactions to added food because natural grazing surfaces are still limited. In established tanks, shrimp may respond more slowly or less dramatically. This doesn't mean they're underfed, it usually means the tank itself is providing more of the nutrition. The most valuable skill a shrimp keeper develops over time is knowing when not to adjust feeding. Temporary changes in activity after water changes, during molts, or as colonies grow are part of a stable system. If shrimp remain active, continue grazing, and show consistent behavior over time, feeding is already in balance. When you stop chasing feeding reactions and start watching how shrimp use the aquarium, feeding becomes simpler, more predictable, and far less stressful. Shrimp thrive when their environment provides most of what they need, and food simply supports what's already working. Shrimp feeding doesn't need to be complex, but it does need to be intentional. Shrimp aren't built to eat meals, they're built to graze. When you understand how biofilm, algae, botanicals, vegetables, and commercial foods work together, feeding stops being about how much food you add and starts being about how well your tank supports natural behavior. Most feeding problems don't show up right away. They build quietly over time through overfeeding, imbalance, or misunderstanding how different shrimp species actually eat. But when feeding supports the ecosystem instead of fighting it, shrimp stay healthier, molt more reliably, and reproduce more consistently. If you found this video helpful, let me know in the comments what foods or brands you use in your tanks. I'd love to hear what's working for you. Now, if you're setting up an aquarium and want a complete step-by-step guide, including how to keep shrimp healthy and thriving, check out these videos next. And if you'd like to take your shrimp keeping further, you'll find links to my premium shrimp food collection in the description and pinned comment. For access to everything happening behind the scenes, you can join the SKITTLE Squad on Patreon. I'd love to have you there. I'm Andy. Thanks for watching, and I hope I made shrimp keeping a little easier for you. I'll catch you in the next one.